Well, Travers, thank you so much for joining us here at the Chariot headquarters. Super excited for people to know more about you and your story and the great work that you all are doing. But why don't we start off with just having you introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mitch. It's a privilege to be here. Great to finally see the Chariot office. I've seen it in the background of calls in the past. So great to be here. My name is Travers Oliver. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm the head of Philanthropic Services at Founders Pledge.
Amazing. And if folks don't know, what is Founders Pledge?
Yeah, so Founders Pledge is really a global nonprofit. We have 3 legal entities in the US, the UK, and in Germany. We're a collection of entrepreneurs, investors, and founders who've essentially made a pledge of a certain portion or meaningful portion of their assets to charity at time of exit. So we're a huge community. There's several members spread out across over 40 countries. And we also administer donor advised funds to our members, and we have our own in-house thematic funds, which we make grants from as well.
Amazing. How long has Founders Pledge been around?
Yeah, so last year was our 10-year anniversary, which is pretty crazy to think about. It feels like we're a young organization, but also we've been around for a while. So it's been really cool. I've been at Founders Pledge now about 3 years, and so I've really seen kind of that shift from really an early startup phase to now a more established organization.
Amazing. And you've grown significantly. What is your current scale of operation?
Yeah, so last year in particular, which is the year we came to Chariot, and it was really a blessing to see us kind of come together in that fashion. Our grant volume went up 99%, which is mind-boggling. And I think that trend is going to continue as we look to 2030, 2035. So we as an organization have been really intentional about scaling and how do we continue to deliver the same service level offering to our member base, but also not compromise on risk mitigation or speed.
And so tell us a little bit about your role specifically within the organization.
Yeah, so as I said, my role is the head of Philanthropic Services. So in that capacity, I oversee all the money coming in and the money going out. So I oversee our donor advised fund program across our 3 entities and also oversee our thematic funds. Behind that is a lot of stuff that I find interesting that not a lot of people do, but and a lot of the compliance around grant making, kind of some of the deep kind of strategy thinking with some of our larger donors, and working with our members to really craft their philanthropic strategies.
Well, you're in good company here at Chariot because we're also nerds in that regard. We like getting into the weeds. And so as you talked about your members' needs, and you mentioned earlier, making sure that you could scale that, like what are some of the biggest needs or things that folks are looking for that are these larger DAF account holders?
So that's a great question, and it's one that keeps me up at night. I'm constantly thinking about that. I think the biggest need is, well, one, people want really a click of the button experience, right? They want press a button and they don't want to deal with the administrative work of grant making or the compliance work of grant making. Now, on the flip side of that, they also want the security and the comfort in knowing that when they click that button, the funds that they've put into their DAF are being managed and sent safely. And so that's like kind of a struggle, right? How do you do it fast and light touch, but also robust in risk mitigation? So I would say those are probably the 2 biggest things. And they're not always vocalized, but it comes out, right? If things are going slow, you'll learn they want it to be faster. And the same way too, like everyone wants to be good stewards of their funds.
And with like doubling your activity level year over year, I assume that falls pretty squarely on your team operationally. Like what are some of the challenges that was presenting as you were growing so quickly?
What we saw in terms of doubling, we saw double just. So I always kind of describe grant making in kind of 2 buckets. So one bucket we have what I would say is your domestic grant making. So you have you're a US member with a DAF in the US and you want to give to your local food bank down the street or the American Red Cross. Those grants are pretty seamless and they should be fast and automated, right? And then separate from that, as people start to kind of become more sophisticated or complicated grant makers, they will start doing international grants or doing expenditure responsibility grants to unconventional organizations around the world. And so there's a lot more due diligence that needs to happen on those type of grants. And so what that means for our team is we needed to find a solution to basically take what are kind of all those domestic grants that can be quickly and kind of one-time validation and then automate the payments. and then be able to focus more of our time and effort on some of that kind of more complex and difficult grant making.
Makes sense. And you're not new to this problem or space. Even before Founders Pledge, you have deep experience. So as you were thinking about how to improve that piece of the operation, like what were learnings from your prior experience and what you've done at Founders Pledge so far to know what you didn't want to have happen and what you really needed?
Anyone who's worked with me knows that payments is a huge pain point for grant makers. We just see the sophistication of bad actors getting better and better and better, and the solutions are slow to catch up. And I think this is a pain that's felt across all grant making institutions and organizations. Everyone I talk to always has the same questions. How are you paying? How are you mitigating risk around payment? And no one really had a great answer solution until one day I sent you a LinkedIn post or a LinkedIn message. And so I think that's really what I've seen across the board in my time in this space is how do we send funds safely and securely? That's like one of the greatest challenges grant makers face.
I guess that's obviously super important and your number one focus. Would you say, a two-part question, would you say that like your CEO would have the same answer and would like a more junior person on your team have the same answer in terms of the biggest pain point?
So I would say, yes, my CEO knows these pain points. But I think separate from that, I think it's all felt. It may not always be articulated the same way, right? So the CEO of the organization or other grant making organizations will say, one of our greatest challenges is how do we mitigate risk? How do we do things safely and securely? And someone who's kind of in the weeds in a process will say, yeah, it's really difficult that we have to send by check or by wire. And so it's the same frustration or difficulty. It's just maybe felt or articulated differently.
And so before we met and started working together, how were you solving that problem for those domestic payments?
I would say it was just spending a lot of time doing manual reviews and manual checks. And there wasn't always a very clear solution that was presented. And I think that's what led to my conversation with you. And when I looked at the marketplace, it was really like, I know we're all facing the same problems, right? We're saying it when we have our get-togethers or our meetings, but we're not all coming to the table to try to find a solution together. And so what we found at Founders Pledge and within my team specifically is there was just so many hours, just painstaking hours spent over doing really what should be simple checks and validations when it really wasn't necessary, right? Because the tools are there, the data is there, and it's just a matter of like, how do we find that cohesion and synchronize that into a system?
Makes sense. So we then got to catch up and explain what we were working on. What was it that made you most excited as you heard about the new solution that Chariot had introduced?
Yeah, well, what made me most excited, I think, I don't know that I fully grasped it. I think I did. I conceptually understood it, but when I saw it in motion and I saw how seamless and easy it could be, it was like an aha moment, right? And I think one of the things that really still excites me to this day is how this is really, it can be a group effort, right? Like the thing that I constantly say to people when I'm unofficially, I'm not an official salesman, but unofficially telling an advocate, that's the right term. When I'm telling other grant makers, what I say is like, why don't we work together, come to Chariot, because then you can bring your grantees, I can bring mine. We do one check up front, and then we can all leverage that together and work together. And so that's what really excites me, right? Because rather than all grant makers stepping back and saying, let's solve the problem in-house and figure it out, and then also putting a ridiculous burden on grantees to run through the same process over and over and over again. I think we had a call previously, and I said, grantees will say to me, why do I have to do the same type of thing for Founders Pledge, for MPT, for Fidelity, and the list goes on and on. We want them to be focused on their work. There's a reason why our members are sending them funds, and that's to deliver impact on the ground. And so we don't want to add like undue, unnecessary administrative burden on them. And the beauty of the Chariot Disbursements is that my grantees that come to you can also have been validated and can be used by other grant makers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still always a little shocked when I hear grant makers have a little bit of competitive attitude in the market.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're very much on the other end of that spectrum. So I guess, what would you say to someone who had some reservations about thinking about collective solutions, and they're always thinking, how do I differentiate my offering against competitors?
I would say you're going to fall behind. To kind of my point, what I said previously is the bad actors are becoming more and more sophisticated. Unless you have an in-house team that can specialize on this 24/7 of how to mitigate these risks and how to adapt and be up to speed to be able to send funds securely, you're going to fall behind. And I think I would argue, if you want to bring a competitive edge to your work, which I think can be a healthy and good thing, even in our space, we still need to work together. But I think like that drives innovation and that drives positive change in the marketplace. But what I would say is that like we have a great tool here. Let's leverage this and work together to drive a solution. And also like it increases efficiency, right? Why do you have to worry about this problem when we have a clear solution here as well?
So talk to us a little bit about the implementation. I think that change management is probably the single biggest holdup.
Yeah.
Often, even if someone is doing something in-house that's not super efficient, the idea of something different is just scary.
Yeah.
How did you effectively manage that with your team? What was the onboarding process like?
Yeah, so it was a fast onboarding, kind of to what I said about the 99% in grant volume. One of the things I always say to the team is if you have a small PVC pipe, 10,000 gallons going through it, if there's the slightest crack, it's going to burst right there. And so I also would say like that doesn't mean that you kind of rush into things impulsively or cut corners in your implementation of a change. But I think what we saw was the problem was made very real to us, and we were really aware of the problem. I think other grant makers in the space may not quite be there yet, and so they know it's a problem, but they're not ready to act on it. For us, though, the process was honestly very smooth, and I look back on it, and I'm honestly shocked things didn't go wrong in certain areas, just because like I'm just really impressed with how it went about. And I would say probably one of the main reasons was really the accessibility of the Chariot team. And I think like that was also a huge selling point for me was, from that first day where I sent you a message on LinkedIn and you immediately responded, we made a call. There's always someone on the other line, which is massive, right? I've been in other spaces where we've worked with partners who are just harder to get in contact with, and there's nothing worse. I know we always say in our space, there's no such thing as a philanthropic emergency, which I always disagree. Like there are there's times we need to move fast, right? And there's always an emergency or different tiered emergencies in everyone's line of work. But you never want to be that person who's picking up the phone and it just keeps ringing and ringing. And that's been the opposite experience for us with Chariot.
And from your like technical team, because that's obviously something important about Founders Pledge, is very tech forward, in-house systems. What was their experience or feedback on interacting with the Chariot technology?
Yeah, it was very good. It was honestly great. There was several points during our kind of onboarding process where we had what I would just say like a product and tech team call. I think I joined the first one and quickly realized they were speaking a different language that I have no business learning. And so it was great. It was great, I think, I think you and I and others can kind of speak at a high level at certain things, but when it comes to what does it mean to have like the API sync and connect, don't come to me. I'll bring me the finished product and I can give you some feedback. But I think the same way that I benefit from talking to someone like you, people in that space benefit from talking to like-minded individuals. And so like that access was also still there, and they were able to ask those technical questions that I don't know anything about, but.
Okay, but they had a good experience. And so implementation was smooth. And if I recall, it was like a few weeks. I don't remember the exact time.
Yeah, I think it was fast. I don't remember. It all went by really fast.
And it was like right before giving season.
Yeah.
It was like fully kicking off. And then we were fully live in November and ready for giving season. What were some of your first like reactions to the change, or how did you see it impact folks internally?
Yeah, I think two things. One, I constantly said, and I've had many people within my team also say, is what took us so long, right? Like these were such pain points, and kind of to what I was saying earlier about other grant makers, right? They may not have 10,000 gallons of water going through the pipe. maybe they have 500 gallons or 1,000 and it's steadily increasing. We were at that point as well once, and it was manageable, even though it was annoying to be in a manual process. And so when we saw it implemented and we saw how seamless and smooth it was, it really was just like we could kind of take a deep breath. And I think the other thing too is like, this was also felt across other teams within the organization, was like there just wasn't those same giving season pain points of, hey, this person's wondering what's taking so long in this grant, or we're not waiting on a grantee to provide information that they had to provide last year because they're already onboarded into Chariot and it's just kind of seamlessly going through. And one of the things we did too, which you encouraged me as well, was in the onboarding phase of like sending out that initial launch email to the grantees was super useful, right? So when we did that, they were able to go through the onboarding process. And when it came time to giving season and we were busy, it was just literally the click of the button experience.
And you mentioned this, like, not having to go back and forth with grantees. How has your team seen a decrease or decline in the amount of time they spend on those kinds of interactions, like customer support type things with grantees?
It's been a huge decrease, right? And I think one of the things that I, to be frank, was concerned about and when onboarding with Chariot was what we constantly face. Grantees know that the bad actors are becoming more and more sophisticated, and so their guard is up, right? And so one of the things that was kind of a question mark in my head was, what is going to be the reception of the grantees to Chariot? Are they going to trust you? Are they not? And by and large, they really have trusted you. And so I've seen it be a positive experience. And it's also meant that we aren't spending just a ton of our time doing that work as well.
Yeah. And I mean, the numbers really speak for themselves. In the last I checked so far, you all had 97% of your grant volume moving electronically, meaning all those grantees are claiming their accounts without issue. Like, what is that type of stat? I mean, that still shocks me. Like, what does that mean internally? And how does that match up to your expectation?
Yeah, it's really been game changing, right? And I think, like, you had asked previously, how long has Founders Pledge been around? And as now a 10 and a half or so plus organization, one of the things that we are seeing is we're really doing a lot more international and complex grant making. And this has given us the ability, it's freed us up our time to be able to really actually do that and put our effort there. So that it's been a game changer. It really has, because you can't speak to the level of impact that has on the team. And separate from that too, also the financial bit, right? Like, wires, there's a cost and they're expensive, and that adds up. If your grant making volume's going up, your fees are also going to have to go up, and that's going to have to be absorbed on someone, and who's going to absorb that. And so there's just so many advantages, and it really has been felt across the organization.
And what was if you can recall, your kind of staffing model before? Were there multiple people that had to handle this work previously, and how much of their time were they spending?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me in terms of the time, but it was a lot of time. So between my team specifically and the finance team, having to do outreach with grantees, having to collect the details to feel comfortable. And that can be a lot of back and forth too, right? Because sometimes someone will provide details and you're not comfortable paying those with just that detail, and you want more information. Doing a verification call, and once it then goes to finance has to also do checks. So there's just so many hands that we're touching it. And also in that, right, there's always going to be a manual component to that. There's always going to be a human error component to that as well. And so it really has been just a massive game changer for us.
And you mentioned this donor feedback sometimes when you don't hear things means it's going well, but I'm curious if you have gotten any type of feedback or delight from your members on the ability for these grants to be delivered so quickly.
Yeah, we definitely have. I think they've relayed to us too, like, it has been noticeable, and the feeling of, literally that click of the button experience has been felt. And I think also separate from that too, some of the partners we work with who are also grant makers in this space have asked us. And, I think one of them, there was a point over Slack where you and I said, so I didn't say who, and you were like, is it this person? Because it sounds like the question they just asked me. And they've asked us, right? Because they've seen it, and they've seen it happen, and they're also dealing with the same challenges as well. So I think people see it, they feel it, and they naturally want to get on board.
And you brought up the impact on the grantees, which is really important because
Yeah.
that's what we're all here for, right? It's all of our missions. We want this money to be moving faster and having the impact faster. But let's say even if you didn't have that kind of like generous attitude about why the grantee experience matters, why is the grantee experience important for your business model?
I think that's a great question, right? And I think it also kind of gets to like, how do we deal with that competitiveness within our sector, which frankly shouldn't be there. I think like there's a natural competitiveness that's good for us as people in the workforce and driving change and innovation. But there's a reason that we exist, right? And that money is to move, that reason is to move money to organizations that are delivering impact on the ground, right? And so if we're not doing that and we're not doing the best we can to serve them as well, we're really hindering them, right? And we're hindering the delivery of impact on the ground. And so for me personally, for our organization as well, that's incredibly important.
And I guess we've talked about this, the market a bit, which I just think is just interesting. We could talk about this all day. But what would you want like other folks in similar roles as you? Because that's an interesting thing about Founders Pledge, to be honest, is when I look at all the other partners of a similar scale currently using Chariot for disbursements, the folks that have been the real champion with me have been the CEO. And you've been the exception. And I would just be curious to know why you think that's the case, maybe. What your advice would be to your peer group that are, overseeing philanthropic services or donor services or philanthropy in general, on why this should be a priority within your role and don't wait for your CEO to kind of mandate it.
Yeah, that's it. That's a great question. And I would also say the leadership of Founders Pledge is 100% on board and behind. I think the reason, one, that I drove it, and the thing that I would say to people is similar, positions as myself at organizations, is really I just saw the pain, and so kind of your question to being at other organizations, the same pain points that I was feeling at other organizations within the space are the same ones that we were feeling here, right? And so I was just naturally just a very vocal person, and I can be kind of not bulldozers, that's not the
word that I really like, actually.
I'm not bulldoze. Yeah, I'm not trying to like be a bulldozer. That's the word I'm looking for. Over on things or when I see a problem, but sometimes that's necessary, right? And I think like back to that, that dumb example of the water pushing through a pipe is like, don't let it get to the point where gallons of water are rushing through a pipe, right? If you see a crack, fix it. And look for the solution, right? And be an advocate within your organization. Be an advocate to the CEO, whoever has the ability to kind of steer the ship of the organization, because you don't want to be in a situation where water's just gushing through, and you also don't want to be in a situation where like there's a massive risk event or something where you're looking back and you're saying, man, if only we had acted on this sooner, or we did it and we delayed, and you don't want to be that person. So my advice to people in similar roles is like, we are here to deliver funds to charities on the ground, delivering impact. And in order for us to do that well, we have to A, be able to do that with speed, but B, we need to do that with precision, and precision in the sense of risk mitigation as well, right? How are we doing things safely and securely? And that's of the utmost importance. That's an importance for the charities who are potentially going to lose the money if we don't do it like that. It's important for our member base or DAF holders. And it's also important for our organization, right? Like no one wants a reputational risk of their organization for something going wrong because someone in my shoes or whoever in an organization didn't act when they had the chance.
Totally. And you brought this up several times, so I just want to double click to you on that risk. Like, I think it's easy for someone to hear like risk are going up and not really grasp what that means. Can you just share a little bit about like what is the risk that we're guarding against? Why are the existing workflows of a lot of grant makers not sufficient for where that risk has evolved to?
So it's great. And I think you probably hear this all the time of one, the amount of checks that are flying through the mail right now to charities and just the risk that pose of someone getting a hold of it or it's not going to the right place, the time delay, wires being entered incorrectly, or, a bad actor who, you think you're talking to Mitch at Chariot, but it was actually Mitch and it was spelled with a K or I don't know. And like those things are happening, right? And it's really hard. It's getting harder and harder to mitigate it. And I think like the rate at which, and I don't say this to scare people, I say this to say like, we need to be thinking about this as grant makers, because if we're not, we're opening ourselves up to this risk, right? But the rate at which the bad actors are, expanding and it's just rapidly evolving, right? And they're becoming more and more sophisticated. You're trying to do a verification call with someone, you could be speaking with an AI bot on the other end. You want to do a video call, they can do an AI deepfake. These are things that like we need to be thinking about, and we need to figure out how do we mitigate this risk.
You nailed on the head. I think it's really how having solutions that are keenly aware of the specific risks to nonprofits.
Yeah.
It's not just like payment risk at large, but why you mentioned checks coming in the mail. Like there's these unique sources of risk. Payments are unexpected. You don't know when you're going to get a payment from most grant makers. So there's just so many opportunities for bad actors, like you said. So, and if you're focused on, donor satisfaction and account growth, there's no faster way to lose a donor than mishandling the grant that they recommended.
Yeah, certainly.
So, I guess thinking about, like, you've seen this rapid growth. It's been felt across the industry, both on grant making and on contribution volume. People ask me this all the time, so I can take a chance to ask you, like, where do you think the DAF market will be in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think it's an exciting question. I've been in the DAF space about 8-ish years now, and it has changed dramatically. And I think that's an exciting thing. I think what I have seen is DAFs in their initial explosion were really in response to basically, I don't want to have a private foundation. I don't want to deal with the administrative burden of a foundation or what have you. Put my money in a DAF. I can basically do the same level of grant making, or actually, I don't need to do all the administrative burden that comes with a private foundation. And so what that meant is most of the people in the early stages who were holding DAFs had a decent amount of wealth, right, that they were willing to play with and to give philanthropically. Whereas now, when we look at the DAF sector as a whole, it's really accessible to anyone, right? There's so many players in the space, which is massively exciting. But also, account minimums for DAFs are not the same. Like DAFs, you can download an app on your phone and get on and give money instead of writing a check yourself or delivering it by hand. So that's incredibly exciting, and I think that trend will continue to grow. Separate from that too, I think the volume, just the sheer volume. I mean, you probably know better than me. I think from 2024 to 2025, the increase was what, like 30% of volume in DAFs went up. I mean, that may be wrong. Am I right in that? I think it is.
That's what we saw from the nonprofit side.
Yeah, right. And so, I mean, it's incredibly exciting, right? And I think that's going to continue to happen. And so we just need to do it well, right? Like this momentum's there. People are there. They're bought into DAFs. And we just need to be able to deliver a great product.
And for nonprofits, because we obviously interact with both grant makers and nonprofits, what would you want them to know about DAFs that you feel like it's misunderstood?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I always say to people is they're not as scary as you think they are. But the thing that I do say to people is like, look, it can be difficult. People always want to say like, we want to have, a fundraising strategy around how we're soliciting funds from DAFs. And I think that's great, but there's always going to be a degree of like separation, right? And people are using DAFs. It's not the same level of connection that you're going to have if this person was just an individual donor who's mailing a check or doing a credit card contribution. And that's fine. It has its pros and its cons. But what I tell nonprofits is make yourself as visible in accepting DAFs as possible, right? I think oftentimes DAF holders don't always have a great understanding of what they can and cannot do with DAFs. And that's something us in the industry need to get better at explaining. And so, the amount of times I've heard from people, well, I didn't know I could use my DAF to give to this organization. So from a nonprofit's point of view listening, what I tell people is put it on your Give Now page, your donate button page. We can accept DAFs, do DAF pay buttons, onboard with Chariot, do everything you can to make yourself visible and accessible to DAF holders.
Some great piece of advice. Anything else you feel like we haven't covered related to Chariot, how you're using the tools, anything you would want people to know?
Yeah, no, I think it's just been, like I've said, it's really been just an incredible tool for us as an organization. As we continue to scale, as we continue to be more of a global organization, delivering impact across the globe, this has enabled us to do that better and faster and safer.
And my last question, actually, do you have any, I mentioned like the DAP space goal in 5 years. Is it Founders Pledge specifically? Do you have a specific forward goal or key strategy that you're aiming for?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We always have ambitious goals, really. And what we just want to continue to see is we want to see entrepreneurs and founders and our members be able to deliver impact globally. And just, to the degree that we can do that safely and securely, the better.